We are so pleased to have three presenters with us today with an impressive depth of experience on today's topic. We hope the insights shared today will provide you with important tools to help you develop more effective bilingual programs. Before we start the presentation, I'd like to take a moment for our guests to introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alison Schofield, and I am one of the co-founders, along with Francesca, at the Center for Educators of Bilingual and Multilingual Learners, also called BMLs for short. And I am a consultant and also a specialist with bilingual students. I was also a teacher previously. So we hope you enjoy the workshop today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Francesca McGeary, and I was myself educated bilingually, French and English. I speak, read and write about 7 languages, including a master's in Chinese, Lang and Lit. And having been through the bilingual education myself, I feel I have a really deep understanding and empathy for what it's like for our bilingual children's journey through this, as well as the teachers too. So I hope you enjoy the talk today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Hollington. Greetings from Paris. I'm a head of ICS Paris, an international school here in Paris, France. And I've worked with Alison and Francesca in 3 other schools around the world in bilingual education, French, English, Chinese, English, and also with our bilingual and multilingual learners in all the international schools that I have worked with. So I'm looking forward to talking about what it's like to do this practically, because that's most important for teachers and administrators. So welcome.
All right. Let's begin. So to give you a little bit of an overview about what this presentation is going to include, I just want to share a few points, and it's called Getting Your Bilingual Program Right. And it's all about what you can do to enhance a current or existing program that you might be running, whether it's in a small local community school or whether you're thinking about or working in an international context. That's very important as well. And we'll be talking about both of those contexts, all right? So we will frequently refer to those contexts if it's relevant. We're going to talk about why we should care about bilingual programs. What is the most relevant research to consider when you're building up and implementing your program and even monitoring its effectiveness? This is a big point here. What can go wrong? So we're going to, of course, talk about what can go wrong, but on the flip side, we'll share some things that you can do to ensure that it goes right. And then finally, we'll talk about how do we ensure we're getting results with our program? What are the components that we need to fit together like puzzle pieces to make sure that everything comes together in the right way so that both your program works and you can build it up and grow it, and then so your students are also learning and developing at the right rates. So let's get started. So Francesca is going to tell us about this.
Yeah, this is a poster that Alison and I created, and we just love sharing this with schools and teachers and parents that we work with. And it says, being bilingual is my superpower. And what we try and show here is we highlight the wonderful benefits of being a multilingual student in our schools, because there are so many benefits. They can use both of their languages to learn and to think at the same time, so they can flip back and forth. And they have a unique way of looking and understanding the world through their both lenses that they use as they're acquiring and learning. And then, of course, they have great benefits for job opportunities in the future. I mean, that goes without saying. And the research also shows that there's positive benefits even to the brain. It slows down dementia and things like that. But we wanted to touch upon the fact that there's so much more. You're bilingual, you're biliterate, and you're bicultural. And The gifts of being bilingual are tremendous because you can access and see the world from a different perspective through that lens of bilingualism. And you can see here the door, it says, my languages open the doors to centuries of ideas and history and culture and knowledge. And what we mean by that is that once you can access the language and you can learn through the literature, through the arts, the music, you get a different perspective and you can have a different mindset that monolinguals just don't have. So we love to share this with schools, and we say that once you can speak a language, you can actually talk with those people who speak that language too and can communicate much more easily and understand things from their perspective. And that's the benefit from it. So we really encourage people to raise their children bilingually or to educate them that way too, because it is a superpower. Yeah, now this is a great activity that we love to do in schools as well. Obviously, because I speak Chinese, I have a unique understanding and perspective of Chinese culture. And I was sharing this one day with my monolingual colleagues, and I was saying to them, what do you think about when you look at a picture of the moon? And of course, you know, the Westerners from the UK or the States were all saying, well, we think of Halloween, spooky, haunted, creepy, and all these words started to come up. And I said, well, that's very interesting, because if you look at it from the Chinese mindset, what they think of is loneliness or homesickness. And that's because all the Chinese, when they're in grades 1 and 2, they learn a fantastic poem by the poet Li Bai, which talks about the moon and homesickness. And every student in China knows about this, and it's part of their deep, deep psyche and deep culture. So we just wanted to point out here that when you look at something from a monolingual perspective, you're only seeing it from one side. But from a bilingual perspective, you're actually seeing it from both, and you're seeing it from many sides. And that's what we want to encourage, especially in this world today. We really have, with a global world where people are traveling much more, and children and people have much more communication with other people from other countries and cultures, it's important that they have exposure to that mindset.
Great.
So that's a really good, oh, sorry, Athena, you had a question.
Yes, I did. So I'm going to actually start with you, Alison. That's why she jumped in to answer my question.
Yeah.
So what is the value of a bilingual education program for students today?
Oh, that's a great question, because really we're talking about, excuse me, all the things Francesca mentioned is having a global perspective and the ability to link into different cultures. If you just look at this factoid that I've put here, in Switzerland, multilingualism accounts for 10% of the GDP, let's say, and that's the gross domestic product. So it means the economy essentially. So that multilingual people, because they can tap into different markets and do different skill sets, they're able to contribute an additional 10%. Excuse me. While in the UK, the lack of multilingualism is accounting for minus 3.5% of the GDP or the economy, because they're just not meeting the demands in terms of people growing their languages. So that really affects, you know, the economy, and we can see some of that happening, you know, in these past few weeks, even that the economy becomes weaker. So with globalization, with even the fact that COVID has accelerated our participation in a global or a cross-border world, our students will need to be able to participate in that. So what better way to help our students access new languages than with a bilingual program or even a multilingual program? This is really important. And I think there is so much value, not just for that, but also for individuals, especially if the bilingual program is one of their home languages or culture that's really important for them. So that will enable them to learn English or another language as well as their home languages also. Now, Thomas and Collier in 1997 did a really amazing longitudinal study, and they found that bilingual programs achieved better results for students in terms of academic achievement. So if we look at all the benefits and all the value for society, we just have to consider putting a bilingual program into our schools. I don't think there's really any other option. So today, probably we're speaking to the choir here. So hopefully you got a few other skills here to pick up on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Alison, I see that from the school perspective, from parents moving around the world, how important it is for their children to have another language. And I wanted to just go back to that point you made about bilinguals actually performing at a higher level. I saw that in my last school. Our students, they had higher reading scores, not initially, obviously, but later on in the primary school. And it was really interesting to see that. And parents, they really want to have bilingual education, and our students need to learn more than one language. It's actually a no-brainer. They have to do that. And I think it's really important for all the reasons you just outlined.
Great. Yeah.
Great. So if we're looking to plan an effective bilingual program, what are some of the most important considerations to have in mind?
All right. That's an amazing place to look at next. So when we're talking about bilingual and multilingual learners, we refer to them as BMLs. We're talking about children who are either bilingual right now, or they're going to be bilinguals because they're coming to school. And what's fascinating through our research, we found that educators all over the world, no matter what country they were in, they generally do not receive any training to understand the research related to these learners, even though nowadays these are one of the fastest growing student populations. So it's very important that we understand the value of this, the training and knowing your learners, because what happens is that you can tend to point your programming in the wrong direction. Now, one of the things that happens when you're not aware of the BML knowledge base, we call it the BML knowledge base, when you don't know about the essential research and knowledge, is that there are many myths that come into play about bilingualism, how it develops, what you need to do to support bilingual learning. And in fact, it can be counterintuitive. So it's really important that you get your understandings firm and you're solid in the research. Excuse me. So let me tell you a little bit about some really key points within each of these areas. Excuse me. We've just started and already I've got the hoarse throat. All right. Probably from talking so much today already. So with language acquisition, our teachers really need to be aware about how long it takes a student to learn a new language. So if you've heard of Jim Cummins and his BICS and CALP theories, this is really important. So BICS is basic interpersonal communication skills or conversational language. So that's quite easy for our students to pick up and naturally. So they do that while they're on the playground, while they're interacting socially, and that kind of thing. They'll get that in the classroom, even with the regular functioning and operating as a student in a classroom with other children. And through, of course, very concrete interactions with props and that kind of thing. And then they can master that within 6 months to 2 years. So a lot of times children look to be quite fluent in a language orally, and teachers and parents even can overestimate what the child is able to do at that point. They're thinking, wow, this child learned English or the other language so quickly that, they're ready and they can cope with all these academic demands. So we've seen a lot of issues that crop up even through our own practice and as teachers ourselves, that when you see a very fluent and verbal child, you may tend to give them work that they struggle with, or maybe you look at the writing and you see that the writing is a struggle and they're not really as fluent as you thought within the writing. And then it might alert you to maybe some potential issues. Are there issues with this child's learning and development? Why is there seeming to be a mismatch between those skills? So that's actually quite normal. So what happens is, to get the academic skills, so the CALP, or the cognitive academic language proficiency, which is all of the language related to learning, and especially for reading and writing. And that can take between 5 to 7 years. And if the student is not that strong in their home language, it can actually take up to 10 years. So that means a student might, be very good orally, but they can take that additional length of time to learn all the academic language and how to even use that language for abstract thoughts and very high level thinking skills. So this is so critical to know, because it helps you manage your expectations about what your students can do when they're learning a language, and how you can even support them. There are other key things to know about language acquisition that can help you to better plan for your programs and to understand your students as well. Now, home language, if a student, as I mentioned, if they have a strong home language, that will support them. So we always like to tell parents and encourage teachers to give the message that, children need to maintain home languages. Sometimes we see language switches, where a parent who comes from another language background other than the school language will think, well, my child is going to school, let's say in English or Spanish, so I need to switch the home language now to prepare them for that. And, that can create a lot of difficulties and gaps sometimes. So we just encourage parents as much as possible to maintain their home languages. All right. The next critical fact that we need to know about is literacy. So literacy skills need to be reinforced so strong within your bilingual program, or even any program with students who have additional languages. And that really means you need to have an enriching program. So think about a program that teaches students actively to read, to learn phonics, how to decode, how to comprehend, how to write, and how to express themselves, and building that naturally into your programming. All right. So that means whenever you can enrich an activity or learning, you bring that into it. And another thing is that you also need to have specific time in your program, no matter what kind of curriculum you're running, where you have literacy skills programmed, a time to do that. The reason I say that is because it gives everybody consistency and accountability. I know sometimes there's an idea that, oh, well, we just, we include the literacy in the reading and writing when children want to do that, or when it's, when it links to the curriculum. And it's actually the reading and writing has to be programmed so that you just don't miss out on it. It needs to build on itself. And remember that, especially if you're including English as one of the languages, English is not a transparent language like Spanish is. So there is a lot more skills that students have to learn, and it tends to be a little bit more structured. So I would program to have a literacy component. And I know in a minute, Angela is going to tell you about her, her program that she ran. So it needs to include literacy in terms of reading and writing, and of course, all the things that go along with that, incorporating, of course, into your curriculum, but teaching different focus skills. Now, the final one I want to talk about is vocabulary. So we cannot ignore vocabulary because it's one of the most essential skills that students will need to be building on day by day, not only through their speaking, but also for their academic learning. So there are many different kinds of words that we focus on when we teach vocabulary. Now, We know that students will naturally pick up words like tier 1 words, which are the high frequency words. They'll pick those up in the context of their activities and learning. And of course, through literacy, sometimes they'll be learning those. But where we really need to put our focus for our students is on the tier 2 words or mid-frequency words, because those words have, they're the words with really the most useful and mature academic words for students of all ages. So we need to include tier 2 words all the time. And when we teach vocabulary, we're not just talking about, you know, teaching words in a sentence and meanings of the words. That's just the very tip of the iceberg. What we really want to do for both of the languages that we're working in, we want to teach, of course, deliberately the skills of the new vocabulary words that we want, but we also want to then spend more time embedding those words into the programs. We like to give students talk time where we ask questions and they turn to a peer and they talk about what they've just learned, and they start to use the vocabulary that might be related to the subject areas that they're learning about. So we actually have specific strategies. When we work with teachers, we give them a lot of different vocabulary strategies for how to embed this. And a lot of it includes academic discourse. So how they actually, we build talk time. All right, so that way, if you are bringing in vocabulary into the learning, into the learning environment, students are more likely to remember it. And actually, the research says that it takes about 12 times or 12 exposures or more for a student to really be able to learn that word and to use it functionally. So that's something really important to keep in mind. And with vocabulary, we need to have our students learning. The average is about 1,000 words or word families per year. All right. That's for a native English speaker, and for I'm speaking about English speakers just now, but it could be different in other languages. But it's about 1,000 words per year for both a native speaker and a non-native speaker that are learning in English. But if we are thinking our students may also be behind in the vocabulary because they're still learning, right? So what we need to do is accelerate them. We need to plan for them to get more than 1,000 word families per year. So how we're going to do that is just by creating the kind of structure through our literacy, through our academic talks, to build that kind of really high quality program. Sometimes you see, I would say that a lot of times when people come to us with issues about their bilingual programs, or even sometimes their EAL or ESL programs, they tell us they have issues with students not learning, picking up the language, or they're not, seeming to absorb it. And these are the 3 factors I always come back to. Usually I find there's a poverty in one of these areas. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of tweaking and some strategy teaching, and very quickly you can accelerate your students to the point where you're seeing progress even in a short amount of time. So this is the most important knowledge base and research. And so Angie, I know she's got lots of practical stories around these to talk about.
Well, I think that's really important that when you say most educators are not aware of the essential research, and I wasn't, and I've taught in international schools for a long time, as have a lot of our teachers. So what we did, we had an issue. We wanted to really develop the learning in our students, and so a lot of our teachers took your great online course, which gave them all that information, and it was a big aha moment. Oh. Because normally, I mean, back in the day, one would talk to children who were learning English in a very simple way. But what we learned on this course was that, no, you actually have to raise the level, the tier 2. So we looked at it, and the teachers were all on board with this. And I think what is really important is the scheduling of the teaching and what is in the curriculum. So in our bilingual French program, we decided to do 2.5 days in English and 2.5 days in French. But then again, you have to look at it to make sure that is it really 50% and 50%? Because our PE teachers were speaking in English, the children were getting French. So you have to really tweak it to make sure the students are getting enough. Plus, you have to have a very strong literacy program. And I think that's absolutely crucial. One of the things that we weren't doing was we weren't doing focused literacy. As you say, some teachers were teaching literacy in relevance to the unit of inquiry, and that was all because we were doing the primary years program. They weren't specifically teaching literacy skills. So what we did was we said, okay, 1 hour every day, that is literacy. And you're going to teach guided reading, guided writing, and speaking. And it worked extremely well because students knew what they were doing, teachers knew what they were doing, and we could track the children's progress really, really well. We brought in the right amount of resources. We taught the teachers how to do guided reading. And we emphasized vocabulary. We said, we want you to use these words. We were that specific because most of our students didn't have any English at all or any of the other language. So we were really, really quite focused about it and quite strict, if you will, on how we did it. But we saw incredible results. Children accelerated very, very quickly. And they just were more at home in the two languages. So I think resources are extremely important, but also having a focused program. How are you going to achieve really solid literacy? How are you going to give the children the vocabulary they need? And so the vocabulary had to be included in our teachers' planning around all the other subjects as well. And as I say, it was extremely successful. But I think, you know, if teachers see what the research says, they know their students, and really they just want to do the best for their students. It really made a big difference for us to be focused in this way.
Yeah. And I always like to say to teachers that when it comes to literacy, 1 + 1 = 5. So it sounds really crazy, but what it means is that when you put the right focus on literacy and you put the investment there, you'll get much more than you originally planned for. So what happens is that literacy opens the door to everything else. So if your students are functioning very well in literacy and can cope independently at a particular level, it means they're going to be able to access books on their own, textbooks or whatever resources that you have for them. So then in that way, you're enabling them to be more independent.
And to develop their critical thinking as well, because you know, if you're using an IB program, it doesn't matter which program you're using really, you want children to explore and be intellectually curious, and they need the language to be able to do that, and to research and to talk about what they've learned. So literacy is the key to everything. Actually, it's very, very important.
It really is. Exactly. Now, this is a very interesting quote that I wanted to share. It was in a recent piece of research that I read, because I really like to read a lot about different countries' approaches to bilingualism and different programs. And in Africa, and in this context, in Kenya, which is a very multilingual country, and sometimes children are speaking 3 or 4 different languages. This was just a little snippet about how sometimes we can overlook the relevance and turn it into something and misunderstand it. And I know a lot of times this can be really relevant to certain contexts. For example, in this case, you had these children who were learning in English when they came to school, but it wasn't a language for many of them who were very rural and didn't live in the city. And it wasn't a language that was they were naturally coming across, but they might have had 2 different mother tongue languages and a community language, and then they would go to school and they would learn in English. And also in many of these regions, they didn't have a lot of funding. So they would be teaching in English, and then they didn't have a lot of money for resources, and they didn't have enough staff that were trained well enough to be giving you know, instruction in English and in the other language. And what happens, and happens in so many other places, is that there was just a lack of attention, a lack of resourcing, a lack of proper skills, so that eventually the program started to break down. So it was ineffective. And what started to happen over time was that people just associated a bilingual program as being really inefficient. And they didn't want that. So
Right.
I hear that a lot in different places where, oh, bilingual programs, no, they're not really that strong. There's a lot of that in the US, and even some, I mean, that's a major talking point in the US about resourcing bilingual programs. I think it's having a resurgence right now from different states, but this is a major thing. So it means that if you don't have the resources and you don't have trained teachers, it's pretty inevitable that it will suffer. So we really need to rethink how we look at our programs. And it's not the program itself that is failing or that might have challenges. It's one of those missing links that we'll go into a little bit more detail about the resources and the training, and of course, the knowledge base as well. So keep that in mind. It's really important.
Great.
All right.
So what do we need to know about students' experience and parents' experience when they come into a bilingual program?
I'll take this one. I think the first thing, as we've mentioned before, I think many teachers are not trained up enough in understanding a bilingual's journey and what that really means. And very often, I always say to parents and to teachers that becoming a bilingual is not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? And so therefore, when you get a little bit, parents and teachers can get a little bit fooled sometimes with Bix and Calp. Because if the student is immersed in their languages, then they can very quickly, over a couple of years, acquire the oral language to such a fluency that everyone's tricked and thinks, oh, this child's got it now. They don't need extra assistance, or they don't need to have a little bit of, they may not come across any more challenges as they're educated in the two languages, but that's just not true. And that's what these diagrams show, is that the expectation is that it's an easy path. But actually, becoming a bilingual or being bilingual is actually a struggle. It can be a struggle for the parents to maintain the home language. It can be a struggle if you're in a kind of, for example, if you're in China with Chinese students and you have a bilingual English-Chinese program, how do you maintain the English? How do you make it authentic? If your teachers are Chinese or your students are Chinese and you're in China, it just becomes quite difficult sometimes. So there's no easy options very often to this. And I think parents and teachers need to be aware that there are challenges along that journey. And there are key points that we found in the research, Alison and I, where bilingual students can struggle. And I think that's where teachers need to be aware, have that knowledge and understanding that, because sometimes these can mimic learning or language problems and issues. And sometimes at these points, teachers will say, oh, the child was doing fine for 2 or 3 years, and now they're starting to struggle. Oh dear, there must be a problem. And I understand why teachers think that, because we all care and we all want to do the best for our students and the parents too. So of course, we're going to look at the child and think, well, there may be an issue. Maybe we have to get that child tested. But more often than not, that's just part of the journey for a bilingual student. And what teachers need to do is be equipped with what those key stages are, what those issues may look like, so that they can meet those ones and say, well, actually, it's not a learning, it's part of the language journey, and continue through that. And to let the students understand too, that it's not always going to be easy, but at the end of it, it's worth it. I mean, I do remember personally, when I was at school, I was always looked at as a problem. My English was never good enough for the English teachers, and my French was never good enough for the French teachers. And it was always a deficit model. And it was only really when I left school and then I did all my languages, and then I became a teacher and I started working in our company and going around all the schools, people would say to me, wow, you speak so many languages, that must be amazing. And it is amazing, but it wasn't amazing when I was a child or when I was a student in the school. And that's the difference. So I think we just have to be aware of sometimes that there are going to be issues, and when those issues are, and be trained up to be able to help and answer that. I think we have a really great slide that I always show to parents. Can we show this one?
Oh, I just wanted to add on about parents as well. So
okay.
Helping parents understand that there's a lot of struggle, and that's part of the process is important, because what can often happen, I know it happens in my community where I come from in Canada, we have a lot of French immersion programs, which are a 50-50 model. And a lot of parents pull their children out really early on because they see some signs of struggle. So then you see the other school, the English school next door, getting all the kids, at grade
By
2.
grade 2, grade 3, that's right.
Yeah. So it's really important to share this information with families. I know, Angie, I think you did a piece with parents to help them understand.
We did a lot of parent information sessions, and you're right, parents do think, oh, my child isn't any good in French or in English, what am I going to do? And you have to explain that these children are learning so many words, so much vocabulary. It's obviously going to be slower, and the first couple of years it is slow, and then it accelerates, and it does, and we've got the data to prove that. But I think parents, they want the best for their children, and they say, okay, I'm going to give up, I'm just going to go back to English or whatever. So they need to have that information. It's very, very important. And
so they know how to support the student at those critical times.
Exactly. And they know that, and that's why it's also important to know where your children are, so that you can actually show them the progress that they're making, and that it is consistent, and that it does take off. But it's hard for parents. They want their children to be successful. They don't want them to do the wrong things. So,
I think this was a slide you wanted.
Oh, it's so nice. Yes.
This is the lovely slide that I always kind of try and show to parents as well as to teachers, for them to understand the journey of bilingualism. So this was a little 7-year-old that I used to work with, and she was a Dutch Arabic speaker. So one parent was Dutch and one parent was an Arabic speaker, and she was learning in English in the school. And it was interesting because she wanted to write, because she was starting to learn to write. And she said, I want to go at my slap room. And in the classroom, the teacher was immediately focusing on the lack of the proper word. Obviously, she means bedroom, but in Dutch, a bedroom is slaapkamer. And so what she was doing was she was using the knowledge of both her Dutch and her English, and she was putting it all together in her brain, and then she was putting it down. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's great. And I said slaapkamer and then bedroom, and was able to show her that there are 2 words. And what she did was she just confused them and mixed them at the time. But that's totally normal to do that. These children are processing languages, and they need the time and to be able to, within their heads, to say, this is one language, this is the other, and to use them.
And they're solidifying them as well, right?
That's
so
right.
A lot of, I know with this example, it's good because a lot of parents and teachers worry that, oh my God, the child is mixing languages.
And that's wrong.
I live in Dubai. And so when I used to teach here, there were a lot of questions around Arabic, because Arabic uses the other writing direction. So children would be writing in English, but from the Arabic written direction. So there would be a lot of worries around that. Yeah, they're dyslexic. So you have to understand that a bilingual student is going to be working things out for themselves. They're going to take a little bit of time to do that. So of course, they will naturally come to learn which is which, but that's just a normal part of the process. So, don't get too concerned about that. I know a lot of people say language interference and things like that, but it's just a lot of this is natural developing for many students. So I think this was a good slide, Francesca, to show our teachers about when we have high expectations, right?
This is an example of, I like to give this to teachers, perhaps monolingual teachers in particular, who really don't understand what a bilingual, from a bilingual child's perspective, what's going on within the classroom. And very often teachers, this is actually a grade 8 text, and it's a geography piece. And what would happen is the teachers would give this text and expect the students to be able to read it and give a few words, perhaps for context, and that would really be it. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph. Iraq Hon Lymphan Station Tarbella. Tarbella Fawn in Rolostan Heredid in 1975 is one as the tackest in the Finian. It's not the gardest or flickest, but it's shipliest in crusts more proshal than the Direct Mort of Shinlan Schlick was 3,200
making a lot of misuse here.
It's just incomprehensible. And what I'm trying to show here is that's actually what a beginner student would be understanding if you gave them a text that hadn't been modified, or you hadn't given them any vocabulary, or you hadn't helped them with key vocabulary terms in their home language and in English or whichever language. So you can see very quickly that very, very often bilingual students are working at a frustration level all the time. And what happens is that teachers don't know what to do with that, and they get frustrated equally. So what they start to do is they spoon feed. They dumb down the expectations of the lesson, and they start to just give the student easy things to do. You know, answer yes or no, or was the car red? What color was the car? The car was red. It's very simple things they start to do, not actually at their cognitive age ability, because they believe that because the language is at a lower level, they have to dumb down the lesson to where their language is actually at. And what I want to do, Alison also mentioned it before, is that literacy 1 on 1 equals 5 is key here, because if the teacher understands that through literacy, through the student being able to understand the vocabulary terms, that they would be able to access the learning and then learn through that more independently, then you would know how to scaffold this lesson easier for the student to be able to access the learning. The key here is learning. These students are not just learning English. It's not an English language school that they're going to.
Or whatever other language they're learning.
Or any other language, bilingual.
Yeah.
You know, they're actually learning content. So they're learning something possibly new for the first time, and it's through this language that we're doing it. So the most important part is the learning that they're having to acquire. And what we want to do is make the language not a barrier to them. We want to help them as much as we possibly can so they can access that learning as easily and then move on. And with that, they will acquire English as they're going along.
Yeah.
So if I switch the slide now, you'll be able to understand more of
A
the
little
text.
bit more. And this is actually an advanced student. I do have an intermediate somewhere, but it's not a start. So yeah, so we can see here actually that the more advanced student, there's still a couple of words in here that don't make any sense, but they're getting about 95% of text. And that's what the research actually shows, is that students need to know to access texts at an easy level, they have to understand 95 to 100% of the text that they're reading. And for it to be at what we call their instructional level, they have to have it at between 90 and 94%. Now, when I was studying maths at school, if I got 51, I was delighted because I passed. I was like, yeah, that's great. But 50 is not enough for students to understand what they're reading. They have to have over 90%. Anything below 90%, and they're working at a frustration level. So the key is to find out at what percentage they're able to access this text. If they're below 90, it's too hard. You need to start doing some scaffolding or accommodating to help them access the learning. If it's above, then it can be at an independent level so that they can access it easily, or it can be at their instructional level where they need a little bit of guidance because there's only 1 or 2 words and they can move on.
And one thing I just wanted to comment about that is that when we find the right level for our students, of course, you're doing guided reading, you're helping them build, you're doing mini lessons, which I really love, mini lessons to teach them the next level of difficulty from where they're currently at. But what's also great is to let your BMLs read books at an easy level, because remember, they may know how to decode and they may be comprehending, but they still need to access new vocabulary. So the more variety of books they can read, you're still reinforcing vocabulary. So it gives them a lot more exposure to those, exposure to the key vocab words that they need to know. So giving easy books is also not a problem, but just when you're teaching, you need to teach with some slight challenge that you scaffold. All right.
Yeah. And I was just going to say that this is the new way that we're working with what was formerly our English as an additional language teachers. We're now calling them BML teachers, where they take the content of the curriculum and they adapt it, they scaffold it for the students. And they can also send it home to the parents and say, can you translate this? And for example, talk about, I don't know, migration in Japanese, so the child understands what we're talking about, so they have a context in which to learn that language. And we found this really, really helpful for the children, because the fact that they can't access something on migration in English doesn't mean to say they don't understand it. And again, we go through back to this, it's like, well, they're not participating, so they don't get it. Well, they do, they get it in Japanese, just don't get it in English, whatever. So it's a different role for that support teacher to scaffold content in the curriculum.
Great. So how can teachers be sure that their bilingual programs will actually be a success?
Here's
Okay,
here's
great
the critical bit, right?
$1 million
Well,
question.
This is the
right.
answer
Well, here,
sheet.
yeah, we've got a cheat sheet right now for you. So with so many moving pieces, coming back
Yes.
to the research is going to help you construct your high quality bilingual program. So again, I want to emphasize whether you are working with, a small in a existing program and you want to improve it, or whether you're starting from scratch, this applies, all right? So first of all, you need to have the right bilingual model that matches your context, where you're at, and the needs of the students, all right? So this is very critical. So some of you might say, well, we work with this culture of children in our community and we want to provide a bilingual program for them, but we also want to teach them English. So what do we do? So, in this case, we often say to our teachers, because we've been there and we understand how things work, we know that they might be inclined, if it's their home language, to do a little bit more talking and conversing more naturally. So what we often say is we'll add just a little bit more of the minority or the new language for them. So we can often just try and create that foundational model. Now, it's important you get that right to get a proper balance, because then that will provide the foundation for everything else to build upon. And I know, Angie, you had mentioned that when you were working with your previous school, you had you took an analysis of how much language time,
Yes.
how much exposure the kids would get in a framework, but then you would,
Yes.
you
We had to
planned
change
for
it. Yeah,
this.
but we tried different models. It was
Yeah.
one day, or whatever. Then we decided that 2.5 days, that worked for us in our context better. But then we looked at what were the students actually learning on those days. And as I said before, PE was in English. So that's a whole lesson that they're not getting French. So we had to really tweak it properly so that it was well balanced. And I think that's very important. You have to choose the model that fits your context, because
Exactly.
and as I say, to get to that point, we'd had 2 teachers in the classroom, one teaching French, one teaching English. That didn't work because so there were we went through a process of experimentation, what worked best for us, and then we chose what works. So you're right, each school is different, and you need to make the right choice of what works in your school.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all, I think I
No,
need
not
to
at
Yeah,
say.
all.
that's true.
And
Not
and
at
what
all.
I like about what Angela was telling us before was that even though they had designated the 2.5 days for each language, the children were still translanguaging within
Yes.
that time.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, oh, you can only speak English or only speak
Exactly.
French during this
Yeah.
time. We also like to encourage teachers to say we're going to switch our language now. So switch, that's one of the skills of the bilingual, right? Is switching
Right,
languages for
right.
different contexts and purposes.
So then we actually employed bilingual teachers so they could do that switch, which was a great role model for the students, but also very handy. If the child didn't know the word in French, then they could tend to figure it out. I mean, but it was just that they could see that people can switch from one to the other, which was fabulous. That really worked.
Yeah, perfect. So the next thing is ensuring that you have suitable opportunities for language input and language practice. So as I mentioned before, you often have to create the opportunities for that. So a lot of times we tell teachers, create routines that just tick you by and they work. Sometimes the routine, when you train your students up, they keep it going as well. And they remind you, oh, we need to do this right now. So have routines around your literacy practices in your literacy time. Have routines around talking. And, at the beginning of every new lesson, you can have talk time to talk about a few things from the last lesson. So build these little things into your program and they will start to naturally scaffold and build up the language. All right.
Yeah.
Family and community support is really important, because a lot of times, especially if you're teaching in the language of your community, that actually supports your programs too. Right?
Yeah, I think it's very important to get families on board, and also with community support going out into the community so the children have opportunities to use their languages. That's very, very important.
Exactly. And even if they don't, if they're learning a language that's not in the community, you can still bring parents and others who speak those languages
Exactly.
in to help have special activities that help them use it. Now, one of the things that we mentioned all through this was the importance of resource, staffing, materials, reading books. If you miss out on any of these, your program is going to be ineffective, as we mentioned, right? So you need to get this right. If you don't have enough books, you need to maybe get creative even and figure out a way that you can have a book drive, or, you know, there's ways to do that. So I know sometimes you're limited by budget, but sometimes you have to get creative. But this is important. Sufficient resources are important to ensuring that your program will flow correctly.
And by resources, also the staffing of it needs to be right. That, you know, if you can get bilingual teachers, that's great.
It's ideal, exactly.
Ideal.
And they also model for the students,
Yes,
you know,
of course,
what the ideal is. So just to wrap up then, I just wanted to leave with this and just show you that this is the future of our work world and our global economy. And we're now working across borders. So we have to have our students ready for this. Our company is producing a report all about the amazing facts about bilingualism. It's going to be a free report. So, and it will go into depth about this. So that's going to be available very soon. I'll share it with Athena. And if any of you want to write to me or come onto our website, we have a mailing list. So you can also add your name to our mailing list and we can send that to you. It's really valuable to share with parents all about different facts about bilingualism, just about the economy and where your students will need to be going in the future.
Great. So I'm going to see if we can at least get a couple of the questions that we have during registration. I'm just going to pick a couple of them. So Alison, what strategies do you use to improve language accuracy and avoid first language interference?
Oh, okay. So language accuracy, obviously, the more practice and the more work you're doing with language and you're getting students to practice and you're programming for that, your students will start to develop their own, they'll make natural links and connections to those languages and how to work them out even grammatically. So that's my answer to that. Of course, I always like to say, do some mini lessons. If you notice a student is having some sticky points, like maybe they're making the same error in the spelling because they don't have that letter in their language, then do a focus around that with a mini lesson. And usually that's enough to get them moving on. And I like to give them that target for the next month. And I say, I'm going to be monitoring that in your writing and your spelling. So let's look at it in a month's time. And I just keep them on track with that. So that's a good idea.
And then what about promoting the use of English during recess time in a host country that's
right.
non-English speaking?
Shall I take that one?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's a very tricky thing to do. I think that we're here to educate children, and it's not police them in a way. And it's very tricky that within the context of a classroom, you can really create the environment where you ask the students to speak in English through the books that they're using, or the fact that you're modeling the lesson through English. And then
or the other language.
Or the other language. And then you
Just
flip
English,
and you maybe have, as a bilingual teacher, you may flip into German and you may be teaching the lesson during German. So the students know that during this time, the lesson will be in one language and during this time, the lesson will be in another. And I think that when they go out into the playground, that's their time to be themselves and to play. And I think again, it comes back to this context of we're really, if you go around the playground and you're interacting and you're an English speaker and you're interacting with the students, they'll pick that language perhaps to speak to you because they know you can't speak another. So it's languages for communicating with people, and we always come to wherever is easiest for us. And if we have already established that we speak to our friends in Mandarin and it's out in the playground, and then I go to their house and then I'm with their parents and we speak in Mandarin, that's a very difficult nut to crack. And I would pick your battles, basically, and concentrate on what you can control, which is within the classroom environment, perhaps. But I really wouldn't fight it in the classroom, in the playground, sorry.
And then Angela, I've got one for you. Which could be the best strategies to make a curricular revision in a collaborative way among administrators and teachers? We've got some experience. that.
Yeah, yes, I do actually. Well, what we did, we looked at the data, and we looked to see where are our children in literacy. And a lot of teachers teach, and especially after grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, with the younger grades, they don't actually teach reading, and because they think kids are able to read by then. And so we looked at data, and we showed the teachers and said, actually, this is where your students are. So I think once you have that in place and people say, okay, we need to do something, so what can we do? And then you build that with people who understand, and you give them the support and the training that they need. I think that's very important. And so there's no point going and say, okay, we're going to do this now. You need to show people this is the reason we're doing it. And once we've done that, once the teachers realized, we need to do something pretty quickly for these children to accelerate their literacy levels, and they want to do it. So what happened then, they saw this, they said, how can we help? What can we do? So we trained them all on the BML online course, which was fabulous. And everyone was then speaking the same language. They were working together, discussing how their children were developing, and it was really wonderful. And so it was a great learning experience for the teachers, but also of course for the children. But you know, after that first year when we'd done this, we saw where our children had started and where they'd ended up, and it was great. And as I say, a lot of the teachers felt really fulfilled that they'd done this. So what I would say is, talk about what is it we need to do, how can we do it, and what are the ways we're going to do it, and make yourself a plan, and then keep reviewing it, keep looking at the data. It's very helpful.
Great. I've got one from the Q&A. Are there main models for 50-50 schools? In this case, this particular person is inquiring about German and English, that they've got 50% teachers from each language with a lot of bilingual colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if anybody...
So I think again, this is going to be really specific to your situation. So I would also look at the context of the community. So that's an essential part of us developing a model, is looking at how also does the student use the language. We mentioned before, for example, if students are, let's say now, which is the case, a lot of times they're learning Mandarin in Germany, let's say, and they're learning English as well. But they don't have a chance to naturally use that language. So that comes into play in the model. So there's not one main model that we would say, all right? We always look at it case by case in relation to your school learners and context.
Great. I just had somebody ask about more information about the BML online course. You know, my suggestion is just have a little quick search on the internet for educators of BMLs. They've got their webpage there, and I received the newsletter and get lots of tips and information, which is great. So we're at the end of our hour here. On behalf of everyone at NEASC, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists once again, and everybody for their thoughts and their comments. And you know, we tried to get through as many questions as possible, but I think we need.
We always talk too much.
Yeah, we need an hour for that.
Thank you once again for joining us, and thanks once again to the panelists. It was a great hour.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
It was great to be here.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.